Welcome to those that have just logged in. We're just getting going. Today's second Smoking Gun webinar is on the impact of lockdown on consumer health and well-being. Just before we get going, just a few basic house rules, really. Keep your mic on mute for the best experience for everyone. We've all got dogs and pets and kids and things happening, phones and all the rest going on. So if you can stay on mute, that just helps everyone to hear. We really do want to ask you to submit questions. So there's a Q&A button within Zoom. Please do use that. Submit questions to us. Phil and I will come to them at the end. If you want to ask something anonymously, then just say that, and we won't say who's asked the question. If you're happy to sort of say your name away from, we can add that in as well. We are recording the webinar. We'll be sharing this afterwards and making this available for people afterwards via our website. And we will also be sending a feedback form after this. We'd appreciate your comments, good, bad and ugly. We want these to work for you. We're hopeful that they're giving you something really useful. So let us know if it is of use and if there's any topics that you would like to be covered as well. So without any further ado, we'll sort of jump in. I'm really pleased today to welcome a mixture of clients, new brands and partner agencies who've signed up to the webinar. So welcome one and all. Most of you will know me. I'm Rick Guttridge, the co-founder and MD at Smoking Gun. I'm delighted today that we're tapping into the expertise and knowledge of Phil Lynch. Phil is an associate at Smoking Gun on data and insight. Been working with us on a number of projects over the last sort of 3 years or so since Phil and I met at the AMEC Global Summit on measurement, because that's the kind of geeky place that we hang out together. Phil's also the head of social analytics at Westminster University. He's got what you call a portfolio career these days with a number of sort of different elements to his workflow. And today what we're really doing is wanting to help brands to understand the power of adding data science to online listening techniques to really draw an understanding of consumer behaviours and try and understand how their attitudes and behaviour may have changed during lockdown. This is really to help you guys to make better informed decisions on your Marcom strategies and content, and really help you to give your brand the edge against competitors. We're going to be looking at media headlines from traditional media and seeing what sort of topics they've been covering in relation to this health and wellbeing area. And we cannot ignore the convergence of sort of traditional and social media. The two are intertwined and interdependent. Phil's going to lead on a real deep dive into consumer attitudes and behaviour. So I think it's 8 million plus social interactions we've looked at, a massive number of authors, and Phil's going to explain the rationale and the findings on that side of things. We're then going to wrap up with some very quick examples of brands doing some interesting things in this space during lockdown, and then go into Q&As as well. So we should get started. So I think when we look at the traditional media, we just want to look at the broadcast media element at this moment. There's been an absolutely phenomenal response during the lockdown period to people looking, searching for news, because we've all been desperate to know what's going on with our health, what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. And this has changed media consumption habits. The BBC News website reached a peak of around 84 million UK unique browsers in a single week during the outbreak, and that's phenomenal. 84 million UK unique browsers. The more than 20 million people a week have been watching the BBC's evening bulletins, and it's not just the BBC. ITV have seen their weekend news TV shows audience rise by 147%. The daily evening news bulletins went up by sort of 20% year on year. So it's just been absolutely very much part of what people have been doing during lockdown to get their news there. And obviously this does impact on people's, consumers' thoughts and their habits and kind of what they start to share on social media as well. And then just looking at just a few headlines, we could have filled a whole deck with headlines around this area. But this is just from a mixture of national newspapers, mainstream national sort of online, men's and women's lifestyle titles here. So everything from retired shoppers going online to overtrade on vitamins, so representing that massive boom in e-commerce, and the sort of vitamin and well-being side being huge. There's been a lot of talk on snacking and family meals and sort of people eating out of comfort eating, boredom eating. There's been a lot of discussion around the role of pets in sort of mental health and well-being during this period. There's been a lot of debate around families eating together more and sort of going back to more traditional sort of family meals, whether that be a rise in English breakfasts, etc. We saw John Lewis announce increased sales of the likes of egg cups and teapots, sort of very, very traditional kind of breakfast items. We've seen a huge increase in Couch to 5K downloads on the fitness app. So that's kind of the beginner entry level fitness side of things. We've seen Roger Black, the former Olympian, this week out in the media on behalf of the British Heart Foundation, urging people to get active as they're worried about a rise of obesity. The graph in the middle there shows from Google Trends a marked increase in people Googling how to lose weight. So that's been a bigger increase during the lockdown period than you saw in the January high, when you traditionally be thinking around sort of weight loss, new year, new me type activities. And we've seen the likes of bike sales explode. You know, we're hearing stories about bike shops buying second-hand bikes off eBay to then sell in the shops because they cannot meet demand and things. So really, we just want to look at how this narrative that we're seeing in the mainstream media, is this reflected in what consumers are actually thinking and doing? Because we've learned in the past with the likes of Brexit votes, it's very dangerous just to sit back and rest on assumptions. So that's the kind of scene setter. I'm delighted now to hand over to Phil, who's going to talk you through the sort of rationale for the social media research.
Okay, thanks very much, Rick. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a look at lockdown life. For this, we've surveyed the social media activity of 1.5 million people between January and June. These results are up to date as of the 28th of June, so just a few days ago. We've run it from January so that we get a sense of what their activity was pre-lockdown, so that we can use that to measure against post-lockdown. I think the other advantage of doing this is that my sense is that we're looking at lockdown, or the emergence from lockdown, as a point of renewal in terms of consumer behavior, in terms of our values. Now, obviously, the traditional point of renewal is around January time with New Year's resolutions. So what we're able to do over this time period is actually then also measure what people are doing during lockdown and how that compares with any changes that were detected in January around their resolutions around food, fitness, nutrition, and well-being. So if we just move on to the next slide, please, Rick. This is just some more info on what we've actually been doing. We applied an open filter across social networks and forums. We asked them to personally identify, to use an I, me, my, we, or our in their posts, so we know it's talking about them. And then any reference to well-being, food, drink, nutrition, exercise, fitness in any context. And what we didn't do was put any filters on for COVID, pandemic, or lockdown. We just wanted to know how people were discussing these topics at any point over the past 6 months. Certainly in March, people would use terms such as pandemic and COVID in their posts, but by April, this was the context, so people didn't really refer to them in their posts. So that's why it was important not to limit it by looking for specific contextual references to lockdown, COVID, etc. The sample is limited to the UK only. We've applied some segmentations on gender, on profession, which we obtained from bioinformation, personal interests, also from bioinformation and by categorizing their posts, and their location in the UK as well. A further segmentation we've applied is to group up in some major topics that I'll come on to in a moment. We also perform an emotional segmentation. So, rather than rely on automated sentiment, what we do is we have built out a series of algorithms on top of the data that actually detects emotional signals in what people are writing. So if they're expressing anger or delight or disappointment, depending on, the sentence structure, the vocabulary and the lexicons they use, we then attribute that to emotions, and a post can convey more than one emotion. It's based on the Plutchik wheel of opposing emotions. We have about 14 that are split into two groups of 7. RTs are excluded. We want to focus on the verbatims, what people are actually saying about themselves. Full Twitter fire hoses in there, piston heads, net mums, mums nets. It's a good spread of social channels that are in here. As Rick mentioned, we've got about 8.5 million posts in the sample by 1.5 million unique authors. Men have been more active in this period. I think that's largely a reflection of the impact that that fitness has, and B, that with so much more working at home over the past 3-4 months, there has been more opportunity for people to engage. Historically, social media engagement during weekdays has spiked at mornings, lunchtimes, and then evenings, whereas there has been more opportunity to engage throughout the day. So if we move on to the next slide. So looking at author profiles, these are the profession groups that we picked up from the bio information. Largely white collar audience, I would say. And you can see there the major professions that are represented in the sample. Obviously, this is for all authors who actually declare what their occupation is. So if we move on to the next one, Rick. Author location. This does follow the UK demographic, really, in terms of population distribution. London has most authors, about 250,000 come from London. Then it's Northwest, Manchester area. And then you have Southeast home counties, West Midlands for Birmingham, and then Yorkshire, Humberside for Leeds, the Leeds area. Okay, if we move on, Rick. Meet the authors. So they're real people. I think often when we're analysing social media data, we refer to the data. But in fact, it's always important to remember that these are real people expressing real thoughts and feelings at tremendous scale and in real time. And here's just a sample of them. Men, women, different ethnic groups, different ages, different cultural backgrounds, but all represented in the sample. And these are just some of the comments that they made during lockdown, just really to illustrate that there is a great wealth of opinion, of thoughts, of feelings that we're able to mine to understand how the British public has reacted throughout the lockdown period. So if we move on. So to start with, just a top line overall assessment of what the reaction has been. So if we go to the next slide, simple question, has there been a reaction? And yes, there has been. Since the lockdown announcement in mid-March, social media activity has increased sharply, and it has remained much higher than the historic average. The peaks that you can see there, they're stimulated by major changes in the lockdown narrative or advice from governments. But the important thing is that it's remained at significantly higher levels since mid-March right through to June now. If you move on, Rick, one immediate question is, are the same number of people just engaging more, or are more people coming into the discussion? And it's actually something of both of those. If you look at the chart on the left, we've got the number of authors in the lighter shading and the number of posts in the dark red. And you can see that, yes, since March, there was a sharp increase in the number of authors, and that's remained above average throughout the period. The actual increase in activity was even faster. And if we look at the chart on the right, you can see evidence of that in just the average number of posts per author has crept up from about 1.5 per day to about 1.75 per day. So there's more people in the conversation and they are engaging more frequently, and that is fairly consistent throughout the lockdown period. So on the next slide, you can see overall what the emotional signal has been from these 8 million posts. So we've got positive emotions at the top and the negative emotions at the bottom. Now, I think it won't surprise you when I tell you that an awful lot of the negative emotions occurred in the March-April period. And then as people developed coping mechanisms and their own individual strategies for living in lockdown, more and more positive emotions come out, whether that's through people's choices around fitness, nutrition, exercise, finding ways to engage online with friends via Zoom, etc. Then more positive emotions come through. And people, you know, we found that they're sort of re-establishing certain behaviours later in the lockdown period, and that explains why we've got quite a lot of joy. People are finding, you know, silver linings in adversity, and they're finding ways to cope and ways to, you know, get on with life, basically. If we move on to the next one, Rick. This is where we're going to start diving into some specifics around well-being, food and drink, nutrition and fitness. We've got 8 million posts, 1.5 million authors. What are their views? What are their behaviours around these topics? So moving on. This is just the top line contribution of food and drink, fitness and exercise, alcohol, vitamins and supplements, and weight, either weight loss, weight gain, to overall discussion. Food and drink, it's almost, those are thousands, so that's 4 million food and drink posts in our sample by about 1.2 million authors. Fitness and exercise is also a significant contributor to social discussion, as is alcohol, but we're going to come on to, you know, some of the nuances around alcohol in a minute. Vitamins and supplements, so that includes the whole world of nutrition really, has been a prominent feature. And weight has been, you know, it's a big discussion topic, but you know, to something that Rick said, you know, because something's generating headlines, it is important that we dig in and see exactly what's going on. And actually, within our sample of 1.5 million people, they weren't actually discussing weight loss, weight gain, as much as they were discussing any of the topics that are also included in this chart. And if we just move on a slide, please, Rick. This is where we've now overlaid the emotional signals for each of these categories. And as you can see, by and large, it's a net favourable, and that's really throughout the whole of the lockdown period. And as I said earlier, a lot of these more favourable emotions, the positive emotions, they're coming out from sort of late April through May and June onwards, as people learn to live in lockdown and as they find small daily victories or ways of living their lives that generate a more positive feeling. A lot of the red, the negative emotions, largely you know, were expressed around March and April when lockdown disruption was at its highest. The food and drink in particular, I'm sure we can all remember March, queues at supermarkets, shortages, empty cells, a rather dystopian trip around Morrison's, I remember my wife and I taking. And, you know, that's where a lot of the negative emotions were expressed. But as time's moved on, as I say, people have adopted coping strategies and things have become lighter and more positive. Weight remains a negative issue. So the conclusion there is that more people are concerned about the need to lose weight or not to gain too much weight than are successfully managing weight. If we move on again, please, Rick. Okay, some sharp questions. In lockdown, are we looking after our well-being? Are we taking up new exercise? An ancillary question to that, how are we using fitness apps? What's our attitude to food choices? Are we trying something new, or are we sticking with the food that we've liked in the past? And finally, are we sleeping okay? So some of this data is coming out for work that Smoking Gun's been delivering to clients throughout lockdown period. Some of it is new because we think it's interesting, and it serves as a good directional signal for how consumer behaviour has been changing over the past 3 to 4 months. So next slide. We will dive on in with a look at well-being. So this is well-being. We've got about 375,000 posts in this. The darker green at the top is where there's an explicitly positive view expressed. The lighter green is where it's neutral to positive. So there's only a small part of negative well-being, which again is strongly weighted towards March and early April. Then as people have developed their coping strategies, things have adopted a more positive outlook. So anything about well-being, personal wellness is included here. And if we look across to the right, we can see some of the topics that are influencing well-being. And fitness, personal fitness and health is very, very much a lead characteristic of when people discuss their well-being. We've got over 400k posts here by just under 150k authors. So following on from this, the importance, the significance that people are attaching to their fitness, Rick, if you just move us on one more slide, please. We decided to have a look at how people are, adapting to fitness during lockdown, and what the adoption rate is amongst people who maybe had not had a personal fitness regime before. So what we did is we used Couch to 5K as a proxy. As Rick mentioned earlier, it's a gateway for people looking for their first, take their first steps on a new fitness regime. Now, as you can see here from the chart on the left, there was a very, very significant increase in social discussion around Couch to 5K in the weeks following the announcement of lockdown, and that interest has remained very high throughout the duration of the lockdown period. Interestingly, women are far more likely to be discussing this Couch to 5K than men. 30% of everyone who talks about Couch to 5K identifies as a first timer. They say that they're trying Couch to 5K for the first time, or they're just starting week 1 of the 9-week program. So, what we can see from this is that, yes, a lot of people who maybe have not exercised regularly before are now entering into a regular fitness program. On the right, we can see that emotionally, it's generally a very positive experience for them. A lot of the red that you can see there is driven by, again, early experiences and disruption in March, plus also anxiety about the need to do something. I think if one thing that lockdown has done, it's given people time to reflect and decide, and then the time to do something about it. And of course, the existence of online apps to support those goals have made it more accessible in some ways. And if we just go to the next slide, Rick, we can see that use of online apps and fitness tech has also increased during the lockdown period. One thing I would say here is that if we look across to what was going on in January, now obviously fitness apps, a key selling period for them is Christmas into January and the whole New Year's resolution context. And there's the same thing we saw with Couch to 5K, which is whatever was going on around New Year's resolutions has been overtaken significantly by the reaction during lockdown. There's far more social activity around both apps and switching into programs such as Couch to 5K. One other thing to highlight here is that whereas Couch to 5K was over 60% women talking about it, here in the fitness apps, it's over 60% men. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, and I think that probably represents an opportunity for fitness brands to align marketing and their approach to communications to ensure that that the new audiences, that the expanded addressable market for fitness brands is being addressed across both women and men. To the right, some of the more well-known brands and how they're featured within discussions. So Strava, MyFitnessPal, Couch to 5K itself, Fitbit and Peloton all doing well. So there's somewhere where we have noticed a significant change in behaviour. In food, I think the situation is more nuanced. One thing that we did was we looked at this whole question of, has there been a change to meat-free? And this includes everything that people are discussing about vegan and vegetarian, as well as meat-free. Now, in the trend chart, what we're seeing is that there was a huge spike in January. This is when we had Veganuary, which really propels a lot of social discussion. But since then, the discussion of meat-free, vegan, vegetarian has settled down to a fairly consistent pattern that didn't really respond to lockdown. You can see a slight jump up in early April, and volumes trend is a little higher, but it's not anywhere near as significant as the change in attitudes to fitness. This is spread equally between men and women. And I think this shows that a lot of the established patterns of behavior that we saw before lockdown are actually informing how people are, eating and their food choices now. If we just move on one slide, Rick, we'll look at it from a different angle. And this is through the lens of pizza. So this is more of a general food category. What we can see is those early spikes in February. I think February the 9th was National Pizza Day, and then you had Valentine's shortly after that. So we've got quite a peaky February. But then throughout March, April and May, pizza discussion does go up, but it remains very, very peaky. The reason for that is that most of this discussion is happening on a Friday evening and a Saturday. Now, that was the sort of shape of discussion that we were seeing pre-lockdown. So here we are in, say, May and June, and people are still behaving in the same way. There's more people talking about pizza, but they're still largely talking about it as as an end of the week meal. And what hasn't happened, what we haven't seen, is some smoothing out across the week that is being introduced into meal times earlier in the week. When we look at the emotional responses that are associated with pizza, the red sections fall into two categories, really. There's the initial disruption back in March when there were shortages, queues, when all the delivery services stopped, and that created a certain level of disappointment and frustration. But one thing we've seen in June is that since many of the delivery operators, Domino's, etc., have come back online, so has use of social media as a customer service channel. Now, this means that people are placing orders online, but they are also commenting on service delivery, any issues they have, if a pizza's lukewarm or if there's something missing from the order. So again, the pre-lockdown established way of behaving seems to be reasserting itself here. So although overall discussion of pizza has increased, it really hasn't changed hugely throughout the lockdown period. And this is based on, looking at over, close to 500,000 posts about pizza by over 250,000 authors. One thing we did for both pizza and for the meat-free was just to ensure that our sample was actually representative of wider social. We ran a second query where we just looked for any mention of pizza or any mention of vegan, meat-free, vegetarian, anywhere in UK social media, in any context over the lockdown period. And the trend, the shape of the data was exactly the same. Okay, Rick, if we just move on, we're going to step away from food and have a quick look at pets. So there's been quite a lot in the media about puppy inflation, that there has been a demand increase for puppies, and this is driving up prices for some pedigree breeds. That may be true, but again, looking at the social data, we have a spike at the start of the year where people are thinking, this year, the family's going to get a new dog, or we're going to spend more time with our pets. There was an increase when lockdown was announced, but largely discussion of getting a new pet, a new cat, new dog has remained at a fairly constant level. It is a bit peaky, and that's because conversation happens more during the week than it does at weekends. But overall, there hasn't been this huge explosion of interest in new pet ownership. And if we look to the right, we can see there's quite a bit of red there. A lot of that is being driven by pet owners themselves, talking about disruption caused in May when lockdown first happened and people couldn't take their dogs for a walk as much, etc. But more latterly, in May and June, quite a lot of dog owners particularly have been entering the debate against, everyone rushing out to or thinking about getting a new pet during lockdown. So you've had quite a contentious debate there about that. So overall, what we're seeing here in some ways reflects what we're also seeing in the food categories, which is a lot of pre-existing behaviours have continued to be observed and measured during lockdown. If we just move on, Rick, I think we're going to come up to sleep next. Yes, what keeps us awake at night? There is a change in this data as this just starts on well, we filled it in, but it really starts in March, start of March. And this was a study that we ran to really understand how people were coping at night and how they were sleeping. And as you can see from the start of March, there was a sharp increase in people expressing concern or issues about being able to sleep at night. And that has remained relatively high and consistent throughout the entire lockdown period. There is a lot of nocturnal posting about this between 11 and 1 a.m. And the main cause of it is disruption to routine. So this is really people talking about their own experience, how lockdown has impacted them and their ability to sleep. Associated challenges are children are a big part of it. Health concerns, which were more at the start, I would say at in March and April, health was a bigger part of it and has since become a smaller part of it. And disruption to routine is what's really grown as a challenge to getting a good night's sleep. So if we just move on, Rick. Thank you. So some general observations on this, and I would say, what we've done is just really looked at certain questions that either smoking gun clients have asked or that we found interesting to answer. Obviously, across a data set of 8 million, 1.5 million authors, there isn't a lot more that we can do to drill down in response to specific questions. But overall, in terms of the direction that I hope can help support your thinking on your comms strategies for lockdown and after lockdown. Social media is more active and there are more people engaged in conversations. Looking at the emotional signals coming out of lockdown, A lot of negativity to start with has now given way to more positivity as people have developed their coping mechanisms through choices around fitness, around food, and around their lifestyle. There are still challenges in terms of the disruption to routine, but overall, I think people are learning to develop a more positive approach. Moving on, there is less evidence, there is strong evidence of a desire for personal improvement around fitness. I have to say that just looking at the food sectors that we did look at, we found less evidence that people are really shifting their behaviours, and that as lockdown goes on, traditional behaviours and traditional food choices have begun to reassert themselves. I think, thinking about it more generally, the food choices that people have been making for several years, whether it was realistic that these may be significantly altered by the 3 months of lockdown, combined with possibly restricted access to a wide variety of foodstuffs, might have created an unrealistic sense of the extent to which we were changing the way we eat. In terms of alcohol, and I know there's been quite a lot in the media about this, and the supermarkets have reported empty aisles of booze, that there's been a lot more purchase of alcohol, and that's certainly true. But in terms of the pattern of behaviour, most alcohol discussion, again, is still weighted towards Friday and the weekend. What we haven't seen is a smoothing out. It's like the earlier, when we were discussing pizzas being more towards the weekend, alcohol is still towards the weekend. And when people talk about having virtual drinks parties with their friends on Zoom, etc., this is more a Friday evening thing and a weekend thing than it is a Monday to Thursday thing. So that traditional behaviour maybe of drinking being more towards the weekend and not on a school night still seems to be holding true. Moving on, Rick. Just finally to add up, as we've been through 1.5 million people, we've swept up all sorts of celebrities who are really talking about many of the same things. So there's just a few of them there. They will be represented in the conversation, and it's just been interesting to see who's been cropping up and joining social conversations. So overall, that's an initial look at this data set that we've created. It is possible to do a deeper dive and to answer specific questions. What we were keen to do today, first and foremost, was really to create some directional signals that hopefully would have a relevance to everyone on the call today. So on that note, Rick, I will hand back to you.
Thanks, Phil. That's great. I think there's a hell of a lot of data that we've gone through, and as we say, we've got a lot more to kind of share on that. And I think just kind of moving it into the next phase of the presentation, we've just taken a quick look here at a selection of brands who are doing some interesting comms pieces of activity during this period. Again, we've got sort of dozens of examples specifically to each of the different kind of sectors that health and wellbeing and fitness is generally covering. So again, talk to us if you want to see more examples. Quick one here is Silent Night. So Klaxon alert, this is a client, so I'll just put that out there. But the UK's #1 bed manufacturer, what they found was their retail channels mostly shut during this period, but rather than cutting back on sort of communicating with their audience as a market leader, they wanted to sort of stand tall and proud and actually help the nation to sleep better. Phil's talked through the deck there. There's been a lot of discussion about sleep and lack of sleep and bad dreams, and obviously linked to anxiety and stress and job worries, etc., etc. The brand's come out and been a sort of a positive voice in using their sleep expert, Dr. Narina, to try and help people to kind of understand that. And we also used a lot of the data to sort of map where there's massive spikes of conversations and worries about sleep on the back of government announcements. Really, that media agenda driving consumer behaviour, there with the kind of fear of what was going to happen next, etc. And the brand was able to kind of step in and try and help alleviate some of those fears. This one is Churchill Insurance. So again, a big. And what we tried to do is pick out a number of brands who spent sort of different levels of marketing spend on these. Some are big budgets, some aren't. Being a responsible brand in these times doesn't have to cost a lot of money. This one's probably had a significant spend behind it in terms of developing mindfulness audiobooks designed for kids aged between 4 and 7. They've worked with a high-profile influencer, parenting influencer called Giovanni Fletcher, who some of you probably know, as well as getting that credibility in the sort of writing the stories with author Sue Pickford. And they've created 5 audiobooks in the series, and then sort of supported that with the whole podcast series. So quite high production values in there, but again, just trying to help sort of reach families. And often if you can reach the kids, you're reaching the parents as well. So you're getting those 2 audiences. This one's looking a bit further afield over at San Francisco. So an American digital platform, Brightline, and they've kind of taken this idea of helping kids and made it more personal and bespoke. So where kids are struggling with the sort of mental health side of the lockdown, they're actually enabling and facilitating free online therapy sessions, so personalised sort of coaching and therapy for 6 to 10-year-olds, and they're sort of waiving their monthly fee for their service until the end of the year as well. So I thought it was quite a nice brand response. Quite a different one here in terms of looking at food and drink. And Burger King, who can be quite disruptive with their comms. This is actually an example from Brazil that we found, and really the brand was trying to help reinforce the messaging about staying home and staying safe, and the need to stay at home. So they created an app, which they wanted people to download. So obviously a marketer's dream for getting further customer information, etc. But then by using the geolocation facilities of people's smartphones, they could see if people were staying at home. The more people stayed at home, the more they could earn rewards in the form of vouchers to be redeemed on their food later on. So quite a nice example of a brand helping to support social distance. Another one here aimed at kids, and this was specifically for children with ADHD, who again have kind of perhaps struggled a little bit more during this lockdown and lack of routine than others. This has actually got the sort of backing of the American FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration, so kind of got that central government sort of support behind it. And it's a prescribable video game to help treat kids with ADHD, and the aim is to help improve focus. Again, it's a free tool for the kids there. One closer to home, and again, one that Smoking Gun's been involved with as a pro bono client during the lockdown, is the Prevent Breast Cancer charity. And what they found during this period was, like many charities, donations and fundraising just absolutely been obliterated. But even more worryingly was the fact that thousands and thousands of patients weren't going in for potentially sort of life-saving preventative scans because of the fear of going into hospitals through the lockdown period, even when the government was telling people that they could go back in and do this kind of going for those kind of appointments. So really we looked at the consumer trend of the sort of home baking, the rise of home baking during lockdown, and tapped into that and ran a Bake a Boob competition using Victoria Economy from Coronation Street as a kind of celebrity ambassador who's already a supporter of the charity, to kind of front it, be the media voice, and doing media interviews, etc. So it's been a great way of kind of getting a fun message out there in a visual way, tapping into a consumer trend, and then asking people to donate the cost of their ingredients as well to the charity. So both getting a message across and helping to boost the coffers a little as well. On a bigger scale, JCDecaux, the outdoor advertising specialist, they had a hell of a lot of media inventory that people just weren't booking advertising for because so many marketeers have pulled back in this period. So they decided in Paris to trial putting hand sanitizers into their outdoor poster sheets, so to giving free hand sanitizers to people out and about, and then their advertising sort of field teams were going back out and refilling and disinfecting the devices regularly, and that's worked really well. And it's now being rolled out across other cities across the world as well. And then the last one, slightly controversial, Huawei, the Chinese mobile phone company that the British government seems to be intent on sort of throwing back out of the 5G network and things here. But they responded quickly with a fast innovation and launched a smartphone with a built-in infrared temperature sensor. So obviously enabling people to, on the move and easily check their own temperature, friends, families' temperatures, etc., which is obviously a key part in sort of tracking one of the key symptoms of the virus and things. So again, it's a kind of product innovation that's come to the fore and getting these quickly through to market and available in China at the moment. So there's kind of 6 or 7 examples of brands doing, responding in their communications, their marketing in different ways to what's kind of been happening in front of us. So at this point, we're just going to see if any questions have come in onto the Q&A that then Phil and I can sort of bounce between us. So one of the questions there, Phil, I'll put this on to you first. Why do some of the findings from the social media contradict the media narrative? Have you got a thought on that?
I think the thing is that, you know, as we've seen in other national events, and you know, you mentioned Brexit earlier, and I think that was a case study in it, is that certain headlines gain traction, they have an appeal, they have quite a, you know, sharp media value, and so the media tends to talk about them. And during lockdown, things like weight gain have been you know, very much to the fore. Talking about, you know, drink sales have been very much to the fore, and the supermarkets have been able to give some empirical data on that, around which the media can build a story. The question for us is, to what extent does this support evidence that there has been an actual shift in behaviour? And I think that is where you know, the question becomes more nuanced, and that in some ways, say around the drinking, that people are doing more of what they did before, whereas around fitness, clearly people are doing something new, judging by, you know, what's been going on with Couch to 5K. Food choices, some things have changed, some things seem to be remaining pretty much unaffected and as they were before lockdown. So, you know, it's really by bringing this data set together that we're able to start, you know, testing the accuracy of some of these headlines. And, you know, as I hope we've showed today, some things have shifted dramatically. Some things, the underlying behaviour seems to be, well, if not unaffected, it's not changed as dramatically as some of the newspaper headlines might suggest.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, Phil. And I think we've often shown in our past work where there's certain assumptions from either the brand or from the mainstream media, the social can show something slightly different. And then again, you're looking at other signals and data that we can find, such as Google Trends research, that can give you a slightly different answer. So I think back to some of the work we did with veterinary brands, and we saw that there's people searching for a lot of help on certain topics, but they weren't talking around those particular so ticks and fleas, for example, within dogs. So people didn't want to talk about them publicly, and almost an embarrassment if their pets had fleas. But yeah, we saw massive volumes of search data around it, and that insight then helped us to fuel content to answer those search queries and sort of start sharing useful information with consumers that are looking for on social, but not expecting to get massive engagement and conversation about it, because we knew that people would be slightly shy about it. So I think getting that blend of data sources and then understanding how to leverage that in a meaningful way for consumers clearly is crucial for that success. Got a great question in here. A lot of brands feel in limbo with planning at the moment, half in, half out of lockdown, still a lot of uncertainty. How far ahead can marketers be looking in terms of their future strategies? So shall I kick off with this one, Phil, and then you can chip in?
Okay.
I think there is clearly there is uncertainty. Clearly we are still in this half in, half out. We're seeing with Leicester, are we going to be going back into lockdown? Are we not? What we do know is that there's going to be some changes forever in terms of attitudes and sort of worries and concerns. We talked in our last webinar, which is available online for anyone who wants to go back, and we came up with a four-pronged approach for brands to sort of react and future plan and future proof their brand strategy for surviving and thriving in an impending recession, however deep and long that recession kind of lasts. And I think brands have got to they've got to plan ahead. I think it's always there's constant reviews. I think going looking much beyond a quarter feels like quite hard at the moment. But you still got to have a long, a 12-month, 6-month, 12-month aim, but reviewing your plans, scrupulously, regularly as you go. But the brands that are investing in communicating and building up that excess share of voice are the ones who'll get market share back fastest and the ones who recover quicker. So I think those that just sit back and sort of don't do anything will be the ones that will struggle the most and be slowest to kind of get the sales back up and running. I think people need to be thinking about what routes are most effective for them to reach their audience and be more laser targeted than ever in terms of knowing who the right kind of people are. And some of the data that Phil's shown today for fitness brands about the rise of women, the amount of briefs we've seen over the years about how do we get more women active. It's Sport England, it's been their mission for the last 10-15 years, this girl can, and all this kind of stuff. And actually it's taken a pandemic to get a load of people to download the Couch to 5K app and actually do something. So there's a whole load of opportunities there. I don't know if you've got anything to build on that one, Phil.
Well, I think, there's been an awful lot discussed in marketing circles about the new normal. And I think the mistake what we need to avoid is assuming that there is a general new normal that applies equally to all brands. Because I think, one thing that some of the data we've looked at today shows is that the new normal looks an awful lot like the old normal. That not everything has changed to the same extent or in the same way. And I think one further point to make there is that if over the past 2 to 3 years there has been this general drive in marketing around purpose, that what has happened in lockdown is people's attentions have been brought literally far closer to home, and they are dealing with their own lifestyles, their own families. And so brand purpose is still relevant, but brand relevance, brand performance, brand promise, how you're going to improve my life, given where we are now, I think resonates more. So if things are going to change, there may be good reason for brands to, as well as thinking, how are we improving the world, but how are we going to improve the life of our customers? Because that's really the question that customers are asking in all this. As I say, their reference point really has shrunk down to their home, to their family, and to themselves. When we look at some of the points that were coming out of sleep, number one cause was disruption to personal routine. So the personal agenda, I think, could become a bigger part of this moving forward.
Okay, great. Here's an interesting one. Phil, can a better for you alcohol brand stand out in the current environment? Have a thought on that?
I would say yes, because when we looked, the top of the question slides, we looked at the role of alcohol in positive well-being. And relative to the amount of discussion there is around alcohol, only a very small part of it deals with positive well-being. So if there is a brand that can say, well, no, it can be a part of the positive changes that you're making, if it can align with what we've seen has been happening around Couch to 5K, then there is an opportunity there. I think I think the narrative that we're seeing here is that alcohol is still seen as a weekend indulgence. We let the reins off a bit, and Friday nights Saturday, we can have a drink. So much of the established behaviours we saw before lockdown are still present and evident within lockdown. But so something that possibly is able to bridge between that sense of indulgence, but also what we are seeing in terms of approaches to health and fitness, and not make them so mutually exclusive, I think has the potential to deliver a very relevant message going forward.
Yeah, great. I think there's something that strikes me there immediately as well as the opportunity to own moments. So it's not a new thing, obviously the weekends, but if that's, you're right, the media narrative suggesting that everyone's drinking all day, every day, and that's not the case from what we're seeing in all the data set. So it's very much trying to focus comms around that weekend indulgent piece and the sort of timings across, whether that be social media posts,
and where it
activities,
sits in people's lives. This idea that Friday night's okay to have a drink, Saturday night's okay to have a drink, but that's it. If there's a way that you can make alcohol appear a more normal part of life, and to do that, it then does need to be safe. Then there is a potential to maybe at least for the brand under discussion to be not quite so compartmentalized as the way that we seem to reserve certain times for drinking and not others.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Well, I think that's all. There's a couple of other questions that kind of are similar to things we just kind of covered. So given we said we'd be an hour, we'll try and finish this one on time, I think. So I think in terms of what's next, we've touched on it throughout. We've got a heck of a lot more data that we just couldn't possibly go through in an hour here for all those sectors. So talk to us if you want to know a bit more related to your sector. We can do real influencer maps based on sort of nodes of influence on using data science to see who's really influential on these areas. We can help you map these findings against your own target personas or discover sort of actionable insights, whether that be regional, who's looking to get fitter by region, or et cetera, et cetera. And we can help you take these kind of insights and springboard them into creative marcoms content, whether that be PR, social media, web, et cetera. So do get in touch with us. But that's it today. It just leaves me to thank everyone for giving up the time and joining. I hope it's been useful. A big thank you to Phil for doing such a thorough job of deep diving into the data and bringing that to life for us today. And hopefully we'll see you again at another Smoking Gun webinar before too long. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you all.